Meanwhile, while Americans are celebrating Independence Day this weekend, it's a much different story for Iranians all over the world. They'll be mourning the deaths of nearly 300 Iranian citizens at the hands of the U.S. Navy. That's right, on July 3rd, 1988, a U.S. naval ship shot down an Iranian airliner en route to Dubai. Now, the incident sparked controversy as the Iran-Iraq war was coming to a close. International controversy. Now this marking a dark chapter in U.S. history, and RT's Jehan Hafiz reports.
As U.S. President Barack Obama issues new sanctions against Iran, he offers these words of encouragement to the Iranian people.
In Iran and around the world, the United States of America will continue to stand with those who seek justice and progress and the human rights and dignity of all people.
22 years ago, 290 Iranian civilians were killed by an American Navy ship, an incident the U.S. has refused to apologize for.
Oh, dead! We had him got it. That was a dead on!
At the height of the Iran-Iraq war, the USS Vincennes in the Strait of Hormuz blew up Iranian airliner 655, killing all 290 citizens on board, including nearly 70 children. At the time of the deadly incident, the U.S. Navy said it was a case of mistaken identity and believed the plane to be an F-14 fighter jet, the same ones the U.S. sold to the Shah of Iran just 10 years before.
The bold-faced lies about, the plane was descending, it was approaching an altitude where it was prepared to attack us. If it was flying at that low of an altitude, it would clearly have been seen for what it was, not an F-14.
Navid, an Iranian American, refers back to the initial investigation.
It absolutely was a cover-up, and even the cover-up itself was denied. Not only just the fact that a mistake happened, the fact that a cover-up happened to cover up the mistake was also denied.
Like millions of Iranians around the world, Navid will mark July 3rd as a day of mourning.
We're showing the Iranian government that its actions have consequences. And if it persists, the pressure will continue to mount, and its isolation will continue to deepen.
She was the mother of a U.S. student expected home for Christmas on Pan Am Flight 103.
The charred bodies of Iranian civilians floating in Iranian waters did not evoke the same reaction when the Lockerbie bombing happened just 5 months after the IR-655 incidents. Years later, the U.S. expressed deep disgust when the Lockerbie bomber was released.
The images that we saw in Libya yesterday were outrageous and disgusting.
I believe that given the operating environment, Captain Rogers acted reasonably and did what his nation expected of him in the defense of his ship and crew.
When you look, for example, at the very different responses to the Lockerbie incident as opposed to this incident, it's clear that the lives of some people are of inherently greater value than the lives of other people, and it's sad and it's unfortunate, but it's true.
The crew of the USS Vincennes was later awarded Combat Action Medals, and the captain of the ship was awarded the Legion of Merit. No one from the USS Vincennes was ever penalized for taking down the Airbus.
The cover-up, the medals, it just speaks to a larger mentality that is at play here, which is not only can we do no wrong, but all of our actions are inherently right.
The U.S. later settled the case with the Iranians at $131 million, compared to the near $3 billion Libya paid the United States for their Lockerbie bombing.
Hi, I was calling to get a general comment about an incident that took place 22 years ago. Call the State Department. So now we're on the phone with the State Department, and they say we have to call the DOD back to get a response. The DOD had originally sent us over to the Navy to the State Department. Now the State Department is sending us back to the Department of Defense.
The fact that George Bush said that, for example, I will never apologize for the U.S. no matter what the facts are, it's not even a matter of apologizing for the U.S., it's just a matter of admitting a simple wrongdoing.
And so, as the U.S. gears up to celebrate their Independence Day on the 4th of July, the Islamic Republic of Iran will be mourning 22 years since the American Navy killed nearly 300 of their people. Jehan Hafiz, RT, Washington, D.C.
And joining me now with more on her story is Jihan Hafiz herself. Now, Jihan, I had chills with some of those images, the crying family members and the bodies floating in the water. Such a tragic incident that, you know, to this day, we haven't heard an apology from the U.S. for. We saw you calling around. It sounded like they were giving you the runaround. Did you ever get an apology or any kind of statement from them?
Yes, well, we went to the State Department's press briefing this afternoon, and we asked them, you know, do you have any statements regarding this incident that took place 22 years ago? And yes, they said, well, we regret the loss of life. We've looked into it, and we did give compensation. But every time I asked, well, did you apologize for it? They said, no, but we regret the loss of life. Well, did you apologize for it? The U.S. does not apologize for incidents like this. And this is well known. It dates all the way back to the investigation, the initial investigation launched by the Navy that did turn out to be a cover-up. And that was something that Admiral, well, at least the former Joint Chiefs of Staff under Reagan admit to. They finally did come out and say that this thing was a cover-up. And the way they tried to whitewash the entire incident was by initiating this investigation and then medals of honor to those on the USS Vincennes. And so, for the most part, why don't they admit to what they've done? It's simply because what you heard Navi Nasir say. It's simply something the U.S. refuses to do. And as he mentioned, George H.W. Bush, then Vice President at the time, said it doesn't matter what the facts are. There's no I'm sorry coming from the United States.
What about admitting that it was a mistake? I mean, just regretting the loss of life, that doesn't sound like the same thing. Is there this kind of an admission that's come?
Not at all, actually, which is another shocking development in this story, which has, you know, been around for the past 2 decades. So the things they will not do is say sorry for the incident and then, of course, admit it was a mistake. That, of course, would open up lawsuits and they'd have to pay more money. You saw the figures there, 131 million to close to 300 Iranian families, whereas the U.S. demanded Libya pay close to $3 billion to the American citizens. And that's why you heard Navid make the comparison to the Lockerbie and the IR-655 incident, because they're so similar, happened the same year, but the response was so different.
Really quickly, I want to ask, because you bring up that Independence Day is this weekend, something that Americans celebrate, a very big holiday. Do Iranians commemorate this day? How do they commemorate it?
Very much so. It's usually a somber celebration. A lot of them go to the beaches where that plane was shot down, and they either let go of bottles with messages inside of them. They usually throw roses into the water. They do a lot of praying, a lot of commemoration. So it's a very sad day for the Iranian people, simply because there was no justice in this. And of course, the U.S. did not admit to it. On top of that, it came at the end of a very bloody war that the U.S. did have a hand in, funding Saddam Hussein, and of course being involved in the Iran-Contra scandal. So it's a scar of the past, still very fresh today.
All right, Jihan Hafiz bringing in that very interesting and insightful